Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Sometimes the best way to find a living is to stay right where you are and study with UAS online. Career-specific distance programs from the University of Alaska Southeast are the fastest way to increase your earning power.
We connect all over the world.
The National Weather Service.
Good Sunday to you and yours, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 10th of April, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date on your local weather information. You can do that easily online at weather.gov/Alaska or on your Marine VHF or NOAA Weather Radio. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. Find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. If you've been following us on Facebook lately, you would have seen information about Fairbanks and the trace of snow that was left. That was earlier today. Perhaps it's gone after a mild afternoon today. Just a little bit of snow was left as of earlier this morning, and again, setting some records and achieving new dates in the weather history logs there for the Middle Tanana Valley region. On top of that, we've seen some amazing wave clouds around Anchorage today. If you've never seen a wave cloud before, you're not really sure what they are. Those are those lens-shaped clouds that usually form on the lee side of mountains after stronger winds have been blowing over. Check out the video there at Facebook and on YouTube, or you can also find that information on Twitter, NWS Anchorage and NWS Alaska, places to go there. Of course, I love to tell you about the daily afternoon map briefings you get around 4 o'clock on the NWS Anchorage YouTube channel there. That gives you kind of a sneak peek of what we're going to talk about here, or if for some reason you can't watch Alaska Weather, at least you'll get the headline information that you need to get in and out the door and be back and ready to go for the next day. Here's a look at what's going on across the region now. Wind advisories are still in effect for the eastern Alaska Range and the Deltana and Tanana Flats region. Looking for gusts there upwards of 50 to maybe 55 miles per hour. Those will be from the south and are expected to continue through tonight and into early tomorrow morning. A look further north, though, is still about winter weather, and weather advisories are posted for the northeastern slopes of the Brooks Range into the coastal plain and across the northern parts of the coastal plain around Barrow and including the northern Arctic coast. Those areas are expecting to see a lot of gusty winds, again from the east, about 50 to 60 miles per hour, and that will likely lower visibility at times and could make things kind of dangerous. However, there's that red area that's showing up now around the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Those are blizzard warnings, and we're expecting 1 to 2 inches of additional snowfall now, as well as gusty winds that will lower visibility. All that combined could make for travel conditions that are pretty tricky, if not impossible at times, around Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse out toward Kaktoik, and southward toward the Brooks Range, as well as areas around the Barrow region. So keep that in mind. If you're moving around tomorrow, you might want to hunker down for just a little bit longer. And if you do have to go out, as I've been saying for several days now, it's a good idea to make sure you've got a plan. Make sure someone knows that you're coming, knows where you're going, and knows when you're expected to arrive or return, just in case something doesn't go exactly according to plan. Make sure you stay up to date on the local weather information there. And again, you can always do that with your NOAA Weather Radio or Marine VHF, and make sure you have a plan before you venture out. Conditions will not be very nice for the next couple days. Those warnings last until about 6 p.m. tomorrow. Don't be surprised if some of those get extended in some fashion. Here's a look at the breakup map for April 6th now. Not a whole lot of changes since the 6th. It's no longer the 6th, of course. It's the 10th, and we would expect a new update tomorrow from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast team. But I want to remind you that on Wednesday, we will be talking live with folks from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center about what we should expect for breakup. This is kind of a tease here, telling us that most of the main rivers across Alaska are still mostly ice, but you'll notice some hints of blue there in the Middle Tanana Valley and out across areas in southwest Alaska. Things are starting to open up a little bit. Now, as we get ahead, we'll start to look at more breakup across the Kuskokwim and the Yukon. Of course, those are the big ones. Those are the ones that always seem to cause trouble for at least one place every year, no matter what. What should we expect for the coming weeks? And when will breakup really get started? That's what we're going to learn about on Wednesday. So make sure you tune in for the hydrologist view of breakup. I'll step out of the way and let them dance in front of the maps here and tell us all about it, because I'm not the expert. We're going to let them do the talking there and tell us all about what's coming up. But for right now, anytime you want to check on the latest information around Alaska, you can go to weather.gov/APRFC. That's Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, and see this map as well as the flooding outlook and just individual river gauges. If you want to check on Circle and see how things are going there, you can certainly do that. Now, here's a look at what's going on today. The satellite picture is showing a huge wave of clouds working all over Alaska from south to north, and a new one coming in behind it there. The drier air is working into south central Alaska today, and as those stronger winds were working over the Kenai and the Chugach, we were easily able to see several forms of wave clouds today, and some of those again caught on time lapse by some of our forecasters at the Anchorage National Weather Service office. If you've never seen those before or always been a little more curious about what do they mean, make sure you check that out today. You can do that on your mobile device fairly easily, and it shouldn't take up too much of your bandwidth. As you look at the northern Arctic coast, clouds are covering there, and with the tight pressure gradient, a lot of wind moving from west to east, and that same amount of wind is working over the Alaska Range in the Deltana and Tanana Flats region today. On the backside of this is northerly winds, and there is cold air, but right now the warmth is spreading further northward. The colder flows a little bit further out toward the west, and those northerly winds have been moving the ice edge a little bit further south, but it's also breaking parts of that off and opening up some water closer to the coast in Norton Sound and around Eatolan Strait and around Nunivak Island. So look for changes there and on the south side of St. Matthew Island. For southeast, you've been very close to that leading edge of moisture. It just keeps creeping your way, and it doesn't really fill in too much across central and southern parts of southeast. Now, there have been some pockets of rainfall there, but it really looks like the focus for the wettest air today and really most of the weekend has been around Prince William Sound. Well, you can see it is now starting to shift a little bit more. There's a new wave coming in from the south, and this is going to be a lot more focused on your area in the coming weeks there. So as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday, a lot of this will fill in with wetter air. High pressure is going to shift off to the east. Low pressure should take over the Gulf once again, and that should open the door for kind of a wetter, at least midweek period for a large part of southeastern Alaska. In the meantime, it's snow and blowing snow, and winter weather is still in full swing across the North Slope there. That's what those crossed arrows mean, poor visibility and blowing snow with that. Some pockets of snow actually falling there across the northern coastal plain, and anywhere southward it's warm enough for rain. That's in the Susitna Valley around Talkeetna, Prince William Sound down toward Seward, and in the northern Lynn Canal and out toward Gustavus. And then westward, a fog around the Pribilofs today with colder air lurking just north and trying to drop southward. The trick is, though, with a lot of this weather pattern, we're seeing a lot of these lows mix out, and that leading edge of colder air, or even warmer air for that matter, just doesn't seem to last very long. As we head into tonight, the focus for precipitation will remain along our Gulf Coast communities and into southeastern Alaska, where opportunities for light rain exist. Don't worry about how widespread this is, as some of this will be passing through from time to time, but it doesn't look like it'll be a very heavy precipitation pattern anymore. In the meantime, Seward picked up about 1.5 inches of rainfall today. Compare that to Valdez, not really all that far away as far as Alaska goes. And parts of Valdez only picked up about 1/2 inch of rain, anywhere from 4 to 6/10, depending on what part of the city you're in. Cordova a little bit closer to 9/10, and really just most of the precipitation was pretty well focused there across the northern and western Gulf Coast. Looking northward, snow showers may continue around the Brooks Range, and again, watch for blizzard conditions across the northern Arctic coast. Snow showers around Kotzebue Sound into Norton Sound, with low pressure very close to the Pribilofs at 989 millibars. By Monday, the next wave of low pressure is working into the Gulf at 984 millibars there. A south and easterly flow will continue into the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island. And weak ridging starts to give way across southeast. Expect a better chance for some light rainfall as we get into Monday. Snow showers will be found just north of Northway and Eagle, some of that mainly over the Yukon. And look for periods of light snow across the northern Arctic coast. The problem is it comes with that biting wind from the east, up to 60-mile-an-hour winds there, so blizzard conditions certainly possible with another 1 to 2 inches of snow falling. Snow showers will wrap around low pressure just off the Chukchi coast and around the Seward Peninsula into Kotzebue Sound. Look for snow showers and occasional blowing and drifting snow. No weather advisories or warnings there just yet. And for the central and eastern chain, periods of rain and snow showers should mix there on the south side of low pressure. As we get into Tuesday, a little bit of a change starts to take shape in eastern Siberia. High pressure develops around 1,015 millibars and starts to break up some of the cloud cover across the central and southern Bering Sea. That forces low pressure to expand and move eastward across the Gulf of Alaska, and you'll notice that front stretching all the way from Sand Point to Kodiak to areas south of Middleton Island all the way out toward the Dixon entrance. That's not a really good plan to keep this frontal boundary intact, but what it does do is push a lot of moisture up around the Gulf Coast. And again, this is your better chance for rainfall as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday for southeast. But that also means drier conditions for a large part of the Yukon Valley and southwest, and you'll see more and more sunshine as we get into the afternoon. For Rainy Pass and areas in the northern and western Alaska Range, watch for a few snow showers, and you'll probably still see some lingering snow up around AKwx Pass and Adigan Pass for Tuesday afternoon. And the winds will still be blowing for the Beaufort Seacoast. Anywhere from Point Barrow eastward toward Kaktovik, we should expect some poor visibility, at least at times on Tuesday. The warning right now only goes until Monday night. We'll see if that's extended. Out across the west, though, as high pressure moves in, that makes room for another storm to enter the western Bering Sea in the North Pacific. And periods of rain and snow should be expected across the western Aleutians as we get into Tuesday afternoon. So there are some changes as we get into the midweek, and we'll see how these storms strengthen and move about, but do look for a little bit of a different setup as we get into the midweek this week. For southeast today, temperatures made it into the upper 40s and lower 50s. You can see where the clouds were and where they weren't. We had more cloud cover and light rainfall passing through northern and central southeast, but once you got clear of that, temperatures soared into the upper 50s in many locations. Across Prince William Sound, Valdez was cool and wet, 39 degrees there. Seward, cooler and wetter, but not as cold as Valdez, 42 there, 49 in Kenai. And Anchorage made it into the lower to mid 50s today in many places. Glen Ellen was 50 this afternoon, Northway 49, close to 50 around Eagle today, and Fairbanks 51 degrees. I bet that trace of snow is gone. We'll find out tomorrow. 36 in Fort Yukon. Looking northward, we'll see 34 around Arctic Village, and AKwx Pass was only 28. Around Barrow and many across the Arctic coast, teens to as warm as 20 degrees around Kaktovik. Shishmaref made it to 39, probably 40 in some parts of town today, upper 30s around Kotzebue Sound into Kotzebue itself at 37, 36 in Nome, 37 around Galena, 42 for McGrath. Bethel showed 45. Southwest, we saw temps in the lower 40s around Lake Iliamna. Bristol Bay temperatures in the lower to mid 40s. King Salmon 47 degrees, 30s and 40s for the peninsula. Just shy of 40 for Adak and Atka, and 35 for Shemya, 36 for St. Paul, and low to mid 40s for Kodiak Island. Overnight low temperatures will stay above freezing for many in south central, especially with the wind. 39 in Kodiak, upper 30s to low 40s for southeast. The middle Tanana Valley pretty close to freezing tonight. Again, it wouldn't be a good idea to put the plants out just yet. We're at 31 degrees there in Fairbanks, with Fort Yukon looking at 21. 5 in Barrow, 28 in Nome. Bethel in the lower 30s, probably close to freezing again. And Bristol Bay in the mid to upper 30s. Kodiak 39 and low to mid 30s for most of the chain. A high of 38 in St. Paul tomorrow. Bethel close to 50 degrees, and you see the warmth spreading up the lower Yukon and the Kuskokwim. 39 in Nome. Shishmaref up to 29. 14 in Barrow, and Kaktovik looking at 15 again with blizzard conditions possible. 52 in Fairbanks, and close to 50 again for most of the Cook Inlet communities and the Susitna Valley. Talkeetna 48. Kodiak looking at 45 and upper 40s and lower 50s once again for southeast. Looks like a fairly pleasant day. IFR conditions will continue across the North Slope again, with blizzard conditions expected, especially east of Point Barrow and around the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range and out across the northern parts of the Yukon Delta and westward St. Matthew and the Pribilofs. Look for IFR around the Alaska Range and across some of the higher terrain in southeast, but watch the improvements happen there for afternoon tomorrow. IFR continues up north out around St. Matthew and Nunivak Island, out toward the western parts of St. Lawrence Island, and mainly across the open waters of the Gulf to about Sand Point and the Shumagat Islands for your daytime tomorrow. Here's your pass conditions. AKwx Pass, we expect IFR to start some improvements there, and for Adigan Pass as you get into your Monday. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we'll see more improvement in Merrill Pass as the afternoon goes on, but probably hovering around MVFR through most of the day in Lake Clark. Rainy Pass should see improvements to VFR conditions there, and we expect Windy Pass and Isabel Pass to both be listed at VFR through most of your Monday. Mentasta Pass, we expect improvements to visual flight rule as we get into the day, and Teneda Pass also looking to stay around VFR. Portage Pass likely MVFR with rain and low clouds around the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula and western Prince William Sound, and improvements to VFR expected for Chilkoot and White. Look for the warm air to continue spreading out across southeastern Alaska. We'll see some of that warm air descend again southward as we get into the early part of the week as the weather pattern begins to change. Remember, high pressure setting up across eastern Siberia. But in the meantime, warmer air aloft is found up across the northern Arctic coast between 2,000 and 4,000 foot levels there tomorrow. Above 5,000 feet, you might find some light to isolated moderate icing potential there across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta and wrapping around our frontal boundary in the Gulf anywhere from 4 to about 6,000 feet, and across southern parts of southeast tomorrow. Anywhere from light to isolated moderate is possible there. Our jet stream shows our superhighway of weather zipping across the North Pacific anywhere from 150 to 160 knots. And then it takes a dogleg turn to the left, 95 knots coming in almost due south into Yakutat and Icy Cape, punching a lot of warm and wet air further and further north. And the ridge of high pressure extends out across the Beaufort Seacoast there. Winds are a little bit slower, but it sure has a big impact on the temperature and the weather pattern. At 9,000 feet, you see our south and easterly flow coming off the Gulf of Alaska, anywhere from 25 to 35 knots, slowing down to about 20 knots over the interior, and wind speeds across the northern coast from the south and east at 20 to 30 knots. Northerlies across the western chain around 10 to 20 knots at their strongest. At 3,000 feet, a similar pattern, slightly faster winds across areas in the eastern Gulf and winds coming in across the Alaska range from the south and east around 20 knots. Winds speed up considerably north of Vero, or 45 knots there, still from the south and east. Across the west coast, southeasterlies 15 to 20, northwesterlies for the central and western chain at 15 to 20 there. Turbulence will focus on areas in southern Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island, and Shelikof Strait, as well as the Alaska Range, around the Aleutian Range, I should say, and the eastern Beaufort Seacoast below 4,000 feet. Elsewhere, no major issues are expected at this time. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with your marine weather here in just a minute.
Now it's only emergency personnel should go outside.
Several times in the early 1990s, residents of Anchorage, Alaska awakened to a remarkable weather forecast. Volcanic ash ending this morning, turning sunny this afternoon. The city and much of southern Alaska had been plunged into darkness, shrouded in a cloud of volcanic ash as Mount Spur erupted to the west.
Anybody that has to go outside, I recommend that you cover your face with a scarf or mask.
Ash was everywhere. It settled on sidewalks, rooftops, cars. Any movement sent the ash back into the air. The volume of volcanic activity in Alaska was suddenly on display.
Over half of all earthquakes that occur in the United States occur in Alaska. Over half of all volcanoes in the United States are in Alaska. We get 1 to 2 volcanic eruptions a year on average.
The Earth's crust is composed of moving plates, which continually change the landscape of Alaska.
What's happening here is that you have to get into the plate tectonics. The Pacific plate is moving underneath the North American plate here, subducting. Yes. And as the plate comes along and then it goes down underneath the North American plate. So we have what we call a plate boundary, a plate margin. At a certain point, as it gets down there, the materials melt again and come up, and that's where you get volcanic arcs.
Though many of the volcanoes are in extremely remote locations, there's a huge concern about public safety, and for good reason.
Aviation and volcanic ash don't mix at all. The big hazard in Alaska from volcanoes comes from the ash. We do have probably 20,000 people or more a day are flying above these volcanoes. The millions of pounds of cargo, air cargo going back and forth. In 1989, Mount Redoubt erupted. Mount Redoubt is a volcano here in Cook Inlet. About 50 miles or so to the north over the Talkeetna Mountains, a 747 flew into the ash cloud. So it wasn't even flying into it right over the volcano, it was quite a ways away. Flew into it and all 4 engines flamed out. They fell for about 4 minutes approximately, I don't remember the exact, before they were able to restart the engines and then land safely in Anchorage.
That close call with disaster led to the creation of the Alaska Volcano Observatory in Anchorage, which now operates sensors on scores of active volcanoes.
What we're looking at here are the 24-hour records from various seismometers that we have out in the Aleutians.
Within an hour of the massive Sumatra earthquake which set up the deadly Asian tsunami, the mountains here in Alaska began to shake.
After the Landers earthquake occurred in '92, this is a Southern California earthquake. It was a magnitude 7 something. It lit up the entire U.S. West Coast with little micro earthquakes. And so it was a big revolution in the seismology community, because this is the only natural case we have where we know exactly what triggers an earthquake. And that's why it's so important, is because it gives us something that we can test. We know that these ground motions from the Sumatra earthquake on December 26 triggered these smaller ones. And so it gives us something to get our teeth into about what actually nucleates earthquakes. So that's why it's so exciting.
The link was headline news in the Anchorage Daily News. Sumatra quake sent shivers through Alaska's Mount Wrangell volcano.
Tom, what we have in mind?
Yes.
Depart Golcana.
Yes.
We'll be climbing from about 1,500 feet to 45.
We wanted to see the volcano for ourselves. Was it still active? There was only one way to find out. Wrangell St. Elias National Park Manager Will Tipton, who's also a veteran pilot, was the perfect person to give us a first-hand view.
It's big. That's what defines Wrangell St. Elias. It's huge, and it has huge wild wilderness qualities about it.
As is so often the case in Alaska, the only way to get into the state's more remote areas is by air.
Yeah. Wow.
13.2 million acres. 60% of the ice in Alaska is found right here, Wrangell St. Elias National Park. We have 9 of the 16 highest peaks in North America right here. We have the second tallest peak, second to Denali, of course.
Weather dictates where you go here. No wonder there's so much ice. You constantly work around clouds in this part of the world. But the mountains which shook were ever present.
We have an active volcano, Mount Wrangell, that we flew close to today. Last erupted about 1900. It may erupt again and undoubtedly will.
But one Alaska eruption was like no other.
Novaruptor at Katmai area eruption in 1912 is the largest volcanic eruption in the last century anywhere in the world.
Its force was at least 10 times that of Mount St. Helens, and the scars it left are visible today. When we come back, we'll visit the site where almost a century later, people are still talking about the mammoth volcanic eruption.
All I heard her mention was that they prayed a lot.
Time for a look at your sea ice edge. You can always find this information at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. And we've been telling you about the weather pattern that's pulling a lot of the main ice pack away from the coastline. And that's moving more open water into places like Nome and eastern Norton Sound and north of the YK and into the Etolan Strait and around Macoriac and southward. And you can even see a Polina shaping up there south of St. Matthew. These kinds of changes will continue until the weather pattern changes. And of course, as we are moving toward warmer weather already. Here's a look at the forecast for southeast. Light southeast winds across the inner channels at 10 to 15 knots. As we get into Monday, there seas only 2 to about 4 feet as you head into the Clarence Strait. Lynn Canal around 2 feet. A south and southeasterly flow coming up the coast at 20 knots on the outside, 7 to as high as 9 feet on Monday. And look for a little bit of a stronger flow as we get into Tuesday. 25 knots from the east outside of Yakutat and Icy Cape. And southeasterlies coming up past Craig and Sitka at 25 knots with 10 to 11 foot seas. Northerlies coming through the Lynn Canal and past Petersburg and into Stevens Passage at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, 5-foot seas with a southeast flow in Clarence Strait at 25 knots on Tuesday. Easterlies at 15 knots inside of Prince William Sound with a 3-foot sea on Monday. Northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet 20 to 25, speeding up a little bit more west of the Barrens and into Shelikof Strait with seas at 8 to 10 feet on Monday. Easterlies will cross the Gulf of Alaska at 25 to 35 knots with the highest seas east of Kodiak Island at 14 feet. Those diminish a little bit on Tuesday as winds become more northeasterly with time, 25 to 30 knots there. Northerlies inside of Prince William Sound with a 2-foot sea, north and northeasterly winds coming down Cook Inlet at 15 to 20 and 25 knots in Shelikof Strait with a 7-foot sea on Tuesday. In Bristol Bay, expect an easterly flow bringing 15 knots and 3-foot seas, 4-foot seas a little further down the coast and northeasterlies from Castle Cape all the way down toward Falls Pass with 11 to 13-foot seas there on a 25-knot wind. For Tuesday, those winds become a little more northerly from Bristol Bay and down the Bering Sea coast and also south of Sandpoint and King Cove. Look for 30 knots there with an 11-foot sea, 12-foot seas a little bit further up toward Kodiak Island, and winds there will come out of the northeast a little bit more. For the Aleutians, central and western parts of the chain looking at 15 to 20 knots from the west and northwest. A little bit more of a northwesterly shift there from Nikolsky to Unalaska on a 15-knot wind. Look for 5-foot seas and 10 to 11-foot seas across the Pacific coast. For Tuesday, a wind shift occurs from Atka all the way out toward Shemya. An east and southeasterly flow should be expected. Winds may come up as high as 40 knots from Kiska to Attu with an 11-foot sea. And northwesterlies will continue for Unalaska to Nikolsky and blow into the Pacific coast side as well, 20 to 25 with 5-foot seas on the Bering Sea coast and 9-foot seas on the Pacific coast. Winds will continue out of the south and east for Adak and Atka at 20 to 25 knots. For the west coast, look for light easterly winds across St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, out towards St. Matthew, where winds become a little more variable. A southeasterly flow at 15 to 20 for the Pribilovs on the Kuskokwim Delta. Look for 3-foot seas there. Winds will flip around to the north and northwest for Tuesday, still at 15 knots, but 3 to 5-foot seas develop there as we get into Tuesday. Light easterlies continue in the northern Bering, and northerlies develop for St. Matthew over the ice at 15 knots. Now for the Arctic coast. It's no surprise we're looking at blizzards with winds coming in from the east up to 35 to 45. Again, gusts could reach 50 to 60 miles per hour at some times there, so watch for poor visibility and dangerous conditions along the coast and over the ice. 20 to 30 knots there from Wainwright to Cape Lisburn, and a southerly wind light in Kotzebue Sound becomes northeasterly on Tuesday, still remaining light at 10 knots. And winds are expected to diminish somewhat, 25 to 30 there across the Beaufort Seacoast for Tuesday, but still being gusty out of the east will produce some poor visibility at times. Let's recap our weather conditions across Alaska tonight. Most areas in the interior this week will see drier conditions than what we're looking at tonight. Look for a tight pressure gradient across the North Slope, and because of that, winter weather advisories around Barrow to Atkasuk and across the northeastern Brooks Range slopes. For many across the Beaufort Seacoast, the central and eastern seacoast especially, you're looking at a blizzard warning that will continue until 6 p.m. on Monday. Wind advisories are posted for the eastern Alaska Range in the Deltana and Tanana Flats region. Those gusts could be fairly strong from the south tonight. Otherwise, most of the rain will really focus on the Gulf Coast, and that should be the case as we get into Monday and Tuesday, with a better chance of wetter weather for parts of southeast as we get into Tuesday afternoon especially. Look for periods of snow showers across northwestern Alaska, but as I said, as we go into Tuesday and Wednesday, it looks like a lot of the interior, southwest, and the west coast will start to see drier conditions and fewer clouds, with a new storm moving in from the southwest across the western chain by Wednesday. Thanks for watching. Have a good week.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.